Welcome back, everybody. In this module, we are discussing sensation and perception. And you can kind of think of this as two obviously separate ideas. So the first is sensation. And in this module, we get basic information about our sensory systems. So for example, how does our visual system work? How does our auditory system work? In other words, we're going to get really detailed on how we actually collect information in the environment around us. But in my opinion, the much more interesting part of this module is perception. And I always think of the idea that it's all about perception, which is the process of organizing information so that we can understand the world around us. So to be honest, it doesn't really matter what we sense. It really just matters what we perceive, because two people can perceive the exact same information differently. So take, for example, this image down here. From a sensation standpoint, all we are seeing are the objects in black. But from a perception standpoint, we are pattern perceivers. Our brains are always primed to look for meaningful information. And so, for example, there's this upside down triangle that, although it's not actually there, we fill in the blanks. We do see that because that is a meaningful object. We've grown up around shapes like a triangle. And so the idea is that we take all of this incoming information from our sensory systems, touch, taste, vision, hearing, and smelling, but they all interact together. We group things in meaningful patterns. In other words, things that make sense based off of past associations, links and connections that help us survive in order to, move forward in a more efficient and quick manner. But all of this happens at the same time. In other words, this is a great example of something we've seen before, parallel processing or dual processing. In other words, think about eating, for example. When you eat food, that's a multi-sensory experience. But let's just take two senses, taste and vision. When I am eating a cheeseburger, it's not really as though I'm processing the way it looks and the way it tastes separately. Those are happening at the exact same time. And again, that's called dual processing. All right, so let's open up this topic or this discussion in terms of a more general sense. The main overarching idea is that it's all about perceptions, the way we understand the world. And our perceptions are influenced by something called the perceptual set. The perceptual set just means that there's a filter between incoming information and my brain. I manipulate that information. So here are some examples. The way we understand information could be changed based on expectations, emotions, motivation, context, and more. So let's just look at a couple of these. The first is expectations. In the psychology department at Pierce College, we actually tested this with the idea of organic fruit. So there is this expectation sometimes that some people hold that organic fruit is better than non-organic fruit. And so the way we tested this was there was this community event where members of the community were at the Pierce College, and we had a booth set up where we asked people to come over and try two types of bananas. One was labeled organic and the other was labeled non-organic. And after people tried both, we asked them to determine which one they perceived as more delicious. And I think almost every single person rated the organic banana better. But what was interesting about this was that they were actually the exact same banana. They were non-organic bananas, just simply broken in two, and we put one on the plate labeled organic and the other on the plate labeled non-organic. But because of people's expectations, that filtered the incoming information, and so they actually had what they determined to be a qualitatively different experience when eating one piece of banana compared to the other. Another example gets to the environment or the context that we are in. So for example, Walmart has an ad campaign that looks at the meat that they sell. So you may not know that Walmart sells steak. And the problem that Walmart has is that Walmart is associated with being, a cheap brand. You go there to save money. But the issue here is people don't want to look at the meat that they buy, particularly steak, as cheap. People want really high quality food. And so there's an issue here because people don't want to buy Walmart steak if they think it's low quality. And so they had this kind of clever campaign on a commercial where they brought people into a fancy restaurant and gave them steak and didn't tell them it was from Walmart. And so what you see in the commercial is people really enjoying the steak. They're saying, "Oh, this is delicious. It's so gourmet." And then only at the end do people are they told that it's actually a Walmart steak. So the idea here is that the environment that they were in, this fancy restaurant with, it's a fine dining experience. And so when we're in that fine dining experience, that type of context, our perceptions are changed. Again, it kind of goes back to expectations. We have this assumption that here I am in this beautiful establishment, the food is probably going to be delicious. And so that incoming information, the actual food hitting my tongue, that experience is changed based on my surroundings or context. So that's what we mean by perceptual set. The idea is that our sensory information is manipulated or filtered through these other factors. And this brings about visual illusions, for example. So this is a famous illusion where you have this checkerboard pattern here, and squares A and squares B, they are perceived as a very different shade of gray. But actually they are identical. They are the exact same shade of gray. And if you want, you can pause this and you can actually use a color matching program like Adobe Photoshop to prove that they are the exact same color, or you can just take my word for it. But what is going on here? Why do we perceive square B to be lighter? Well, square B is in the shadow of this object. And so basically that changes our perception. Relatively speaking, B looks lighter because it's in this darker context of a shadow. Again, sensory input doesn't really matter. It really only matters what we perceive, and our perceptions are filtered through that perceptual set. So again, this brings about a number of illusions, like the way these squares are oriented, it makes it look as though these lines are slanted, but in fact they're all parallel, they're all perfectly even. Here, kind of an interesting illusion where you can see an old woman's face or a young woman's face, just, depending on your perceptions. Same thing here, you can see a person playing a saxophone, or you can see a woman's face. Just basically the idea is we are pattern perceivers. We are primed to look for meaningful information. This is something that, went viral. This was the famous dress where people perceived it to be either blue and black or white and gold. Personally, I see blue and black, but I've shown this to many people who see white and gold. And so there's something apparently with the background that changes the way we understand this image. So it's very fascinating. The idea is that perception is just, it's all in the mind. The brain takes incoming information, organizes it in interesting ways, and manipulates it into patterns that we can ultimately understand. Okay, so in closing, what we're going to be looking at in this chapter is two ideas. Again, two ideas. The first is sensation. We're going to look at the physiology, for example, of vision and hearing and the other senses. But then there's also this other idea of perception. And a lot of times researchers use the term top-down processing to discuss the idea of perception. So top-down as opposed to bottom-up. Bottom-up is, taking information from our senses, and it's like what you see is what you get. If I am seeing something, it's because there is light waves entering my eye, affecting the neurons in my retina, sending information to my brain. And there's no manipulation. But top down is really what is interesting from a psychological standpoint. Top down, again, it goes back to the idea of a perceptual set. we have a filter. So here's one more example. Vision and taste. Anytime you have sensory interaction where multiple senses are combined and they're playing off each other to bring about a larger experience, that's top-down processing. So eating food that has a beautiful visual presentation is often perceived as more delicious. So let's think about something you like to eat. Maybe you are a fan of In-N-Out Burger. And when you get In-N-Out, it always looks the same. It's got that, glistening lettuce and the bun is all perfect and everything. Would you enjoy that food as much if instead of giving it to you as usual, they put it in a blender and asked you to drink it like a milkshake? Probably not. You'd probably think that's disgusting. But why? It's the exact same food, the exact same molecules landing on the tongue, and therefore triggering the same sensation. But that again demonstrates the point here. It's all about perceptions for humans. So we perceive food to be better if it looks better. And that opens up this larger idea of perception, the way we organize and manipulate information to really understand the world around us.